Because now that I have energy, I look at the last decade of my life and wonder, what could I have accomplished if I had put this thing first? Because energy is required to do big things in your life.
For somebody who's tuning in right now, they're feeling like they're putting in the effort, they have big dreams, big goals, but things just haven't been clicking for them yet. They feel like, life is just passing them by and time keeps going. How would you recommend they get started at this point?
Okay, so Jesse, think about this. Imagine you and I are going to meet somewhere and have coffee, and you aren't honest about where you're starting from in the GPS. You put like a random location down. You're not going to get to where you want to go, right? Because you're not honest. And I have come to this realization that so many people are working so hard. And yet when they go to bed at night, when their brain should be shutting down, their mind starts racing. And they have this feeling of like, I am so busy. I am doing so many things. And I feel like I'm missing the point. I'm missing the point of life. I'm missing the point of my work. I'm missing the point of enjoyment and pure joy. And there's no worse feeling. Like that is anxiety. Like that is the root of anxiety that I think a lot of people feel is it's like I'm doing so much, I can't possibly do more. And yet somehow I'm missing the point. And so I think the answer to that problem is getting really honest with where you're starting, with putting the right beginning destination in the GPS or the right location so that when you know where you want to go, you can start making the right steps forward.
That makes a lot of sense, but I want to get really granular. So does this look like taking time to oneself and meditating on where we're at in life or journaling? How would you recommend people actually get in there and do that work?
Yeah. So I have this process called a life inventory. And what it is it's taking the time to get to know yourself again, without the constructs of your title or your relationships, without who you are around other people. I can guide you through a few of the questions that I'd love your listeners to answer. Would that be helpful?
That'd be great. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I can imagine for all of us, there's probably a continuum where because of, different parenting styles and education, we've lost track of our true essence, at least in a small way, probably in a big way for a lot of us. So let's get into it.
Okay. So the first thing I want people to think about is like, what inspires you? And I know that's a really general question, but a lot of times we miss the fact that our identities have changed over the years, right? Like we're interested in different things. Another part of that question would be like, what do you find yourself Googling when you have some time on your hands? What forums do you go down? Like, what are you curious about? What are you listening to in terms of podcasts? Like the fact that you're here tells me a lot about you, that maybe you're inspired by health. Another question is like, what makes you rage? Like what just like angers you? Because that might drive you into action. I think a lot of times when you look at people who are making a difference on this world or who are doing really meaningful work, it stems from this anger that like things shouldn't be this way, or they don't have to be this way, or they can be different. There are questions like what makes you laugh? What makes you cry? What makes you feel empowered? Not look empowered to the outside world, but what makes you feel powerful? And what I think is really important is a lot of times we don't even think about these things. Sometimes when I feel like I have those thoughts of like, I'm missing the point, I'm like, when is the last time I just laughed? Like, when was I goofy with my partner or my spouse or my kids? Like, when did I just let down the like worker bee mode of me or the efficiency queen and just do something for the sake of enjoying doing it? And one final question is, what problem do you wish you could solve? Whether it is health related, whether it's in your career, your relationships, what is something that you wish you could solve? Because that might unlock where you want to go next.
Okay. So when we start asking these questions, start pondering and really peeling back the veil and figuring out where our passion is and where our interest is, what do we do with that?
So the first thing that I think is really important is we get honest with who are we, right? Like who am I? Who am I today? Because a lot of times there's this idea of identity foreclosure. I had a really interesting guest on my own podcast, Dr. Maya Schenker, and she talks about this idea of identity foreclosure, which means that a lot of people are walking through life holding on to identities or notions or thoughts or titles or positions that no longer serve them. And it's this idea of belief of like, kind of like if you are doing a 4-year degree and you're 2 years in and you know you don't want to do the thing at the end, but you stay in there because you're like, I would have wasted 2 years. So you're willing to waste the next decade because you don't want to look back. And when we get honest about who we are and when we realize that maybe there are pieces of ourselves or our lives or what we find ourselves doing, we start to understand how we need to let them go. So when we get really honest with who we are and when we actually take the time to sit with ourselves, to be with ourselves, to be still with ourselves, I think when the answers start to come, we are people of action. Being in action is not hard for a lot of us. Being efficient, creating results, like that is what a lot of us achievers out here strive for. And so when we can figure out who we are and what that baseline is, then we can start to move towards where we want to go. And so what I believe is the problem right now is that a lot of us are walking in shoes that don't fit us any longer, and we're afraid to shed those or to clothe ourselves in new identity. There's this fear around change because change leaves me thinking, Jesse, if you change, well, we still have things in common. Would we have something to talk about? Will you still even like me? Will you leave me behind? And so the deepest desire in a lot of us is to change, but the fear around that change is daunting. So when we look at it, it's like, how can we get really honest about who we are? And then how can we figure out what is the vision of what I'm moving towards? And how does my day today align with that vision?
So what I'm hearing you say there is once we figure out where our passion is, where our interest is, next step is not being afraid to change. And with that comes maybe letting go of some things that we've already invested time into, whether that be relationships and education, a job we've already put 10 years into and started to build a pension. So we need to be open to the idea that just because we've done something a certain way for a period of time and have an investment in that doesn't mean it's forever.
You know what's interesting, and I've noticed this more in women, but I'm sure it happens with men too, is that we get locked into this idea of momentum. And it's this lie that sometimes we can tell ourselves. Obviously, momentum is a real thing. You can look at physics. But what happens is that a lot of times we forget that the things that have gotten us to this point in our life, the same skills, the gifts, the knowledge, the awareness, those things will carry us forward, even if it's in a different direction. And so a lot of times when we are stressed or anxious or depressed, it's because we've been saying yes to the wrong things. And we've been living out of alignment. We say certain things matter to us, but when we really inspect our day-to-day lives, it doesn't line up, right? And so what's really interesting is when we think about this idea of change, the biggest thing that is scary for us is uncertainty. Look at the world we just lived in. We're still living in. We have faced uncertainty and adversity for the last 2.5 years, and we're still here, right? And so that should build up your confidence that uncertainty isn't scary. You've navigated it. You've been resilient and adaptable. If what you say matters to you or if where you're going is deep enough and your why is strong enough and you're not moving in that direction, don't let the fear of change or uncertainty be the thing that holds you back from that.
And Jenna, one thing I've noticed with your career and all your different pivots you made is you don't do it in a way where you're cutting the parachute and just jumping out of the plane.
Yes.
You're very careful about slowly evolving. So I think this is helpful for a lot of people because you're going to get the full spectrum of advice when you hear from different people that have made the leap into becoming an entrepreneur. But your approach, I think, is more aligned with the majority of people in a way that could work for people. So talk about in your own life how you've done that in small ways where you've not burned the bridges, but slowly started to pivot over time.
Oh, Jesse, I love this so much. So first things first, I feel like I roll my eyes at a lot of the just follow your passions and your life, all those things. It's like they're very well-intentioned thoughts and notions, but for most people, that's not the reality, right? We need safety and security to move through life in a way that is creative. And for me, I have found myself at so many crossroads. And a lot of times I don't even know what I'm moving towards, but I know what I'm moving away from. And what I mean by that is there's this story in the book where I landed this great corporate job out of college. It was my dream job or what I thought was my dream. And I find myself sitting across from an amazing boss who literally hands me my 5-year plan for my life. She doesn't say, what do you want for yourself in 5 years? What do you envision? She said, here is what we've planned for you. And in that moment, I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew I did not want somebody else planning my life for me. And I have never once in my entire career as an entrepreneur, or even just my career beyond that, just abandoned what has gotten me to a certain point. In fact, I've leveraged what has gotten me to a certain place to take me to where I want to go next. And I think there are two kinds of people. There are the jump and the net will appear people. And then there are the people like me who will weave the net while working the other job in order to feel that safety and security. And for me, when I got handed that 5-year plan, I just said, thank you so much. Thank you for believing in me. And I walked back to my office, and I remember having this really visceral moment of looking at this picture of my now husband in a picture frame and thinking, do I want a life where the way that I see him is in a picture, or do I want to figure out a way to build a life where I get to do life with the person, not the picture of the person? And for me, I didn't know what the vehicle out of that corporate gig was, but it ended up being a $300 camera on Craigslist. And I taught myself to become a photographer, and I went on to be a very successful wedding photographer. But I worked that 9-to-5 job for a full year and then figured out that next piece. And every single time I've had a new idea or a new notion, I've leveraged the thing that is working to help me figure out the thing that I want to do, want to learn, want to grow in. And I think this also applies to health a lot of times, because we're so quick to abandon something that we're like, this didn't work, or this didn't make sense for me, so I'm just going to jump to the new thing. And it's like, are there pieces of this that can work for you? Are there pieces of this that have gotten you some sort of result? Are there pieces of this that shouldn't be abandoned so that you can leverage it moving forward? And so every single thing that I've done in my business started as a side hustle, like a passion project, something that lived without the constraints of time and money. Because if you want to squash someone's creativity, put a deadline on it or put dollars behind it and you'll squash it. And so I've always done it in a way of slow transition to, one, make sure that where I'm going feels like I think it will. But two, to make sure that I have the safety and security required to build something that will support me when I'm ready to make the leap.
And for somebody who's ready to make that gentle transition, but they're feeling like their life is already busy and packed to the max, and maybe they have a family, and we could even put another layer on it. Maybe the family isn't supporting this change. They feel like they should just stay in that job where there's security, and they're just on a different wavelength when it comes to the thinking of this transition. I don't want to complicate things too much, but what I'm getting at here initially is somebody who feels like they don't have the time. They're already maxed out. They're already redlining just to get through day to day. How do they fit in that time to take on something new?
So I look at time as my currency. Like, time is everything to me. And your dreams will expand to the amount of time that you give them, whether it is 5 minutes or 5 hours. And the problem with the world today is that we are so big proponents of hustle culture. And I will say that sometimes hustling is required to get an idea off the ground. But what I'm more curious about is, where is your enough point? Where is your enough point in the 9-to-5 where you can say, I will fulfill all of my obligations with this, but I will not do anything above and beyond so that I can free up that time. Or I will pause my Netflix subscription so that I can use that pocket of time for something more meaningful. And for me, I always have to draw a line in the sand. There's a story in the book, Jesse, where I had built this incredible business. I had reached this massive goal of earning 6 figures. It felt unreal to me, a girl in small town Wisconsin at the time, that I could earn 6 figures doing something I loved. And I remember the day I hit that goal, and I remember feeling so burnt out. And I think a lot of people today are burnt out. And the real goal was not 6 figures to me. The real goal was getting my time back. And I remember the next day, my husband came home from work. He was stocking shelves at a grocery store. And I said, I was happier when I made less. I was so much happier. I will go back to earning $50,000 a year to have my life back. And when I claimed back time as my currency, and when I cut back and drew a line in the sand and said, this is my enough point, I ended up unlocking what was next because it wasn't necessarily a money problem. It was a figuring out how to get margin back in my life. So for somebody that is so busy that they're overwhelmed, like I know I want to move in a different direction and I don't know how can you draw a line in the sand and say, this is my enough point when it comes to these things that are taking up my time? I'm maybe going to say no to some opportunities that sound really good, but that aren't aligned with where I want to go. And how do I free up time? Because how you're spending your time is how you're spending your life. And so if how you're spending today isn't how you want to spend your time a year from now, then you've got to figure out ways to start creating boundaries that will keep you in your life and the life that you want to live.
And I think for people that are still early in the game and have, big entrepreneurial goals and things that they're going to reach over time, it's really important early on if you are tuned into this to know where you're going. So when opportunities, as you become more successful and new opportunities arise, which they're naturally going to, whether it be a book deal or more podcast interviews or writing for this blog, or there's going to be all kinds of different opportunities. Speaking gigs, we could go on and on. But what can happen is you can easily start saying yes to all these things. And this is what you're talking about. You had the success, you were making the money, but you basically were cutting off your freedom and you're working so hard. And it sounds like you lost track of the lifestyle that went along with the work that you wanted.
Yeah. So many entrepreneurs always talk about like leaving their 9 to 5 in order to work 24/7. And it's like we leave a job to get the freedom and then we find ourselves trapped by our own creation. And while it's easy and fun to work really hard as an entrepreneur, a lot of times we have to ask ourselves like, am I in this for the pursuit of more or am I in this for the pursuit of a life? And for me, it's always been about lifestyle. And I want to live a life. I always say, like, I want to live a life like where I live each minute, like I experience each 60 seconds. I say I want a life of fat minutes, meaning like I am awake and alive to every one of the 60 seconds. And for me, it's always been, how do I define what is my enough point? And then how do I create a boundary protecting me from my own self? Because I'm a yes girl. I love making people happy. I love saying yes to people. There's nothing better. And so I often think about it like with my toddler, if we take her bowling, you know how they have the bumpers up in bowling and like it keeps the ball going down the path? Boundaries are like the bumpers that keep us in alignment. And there's a line in my book that says like boundaries don't keep things, people, or opportunities out of your life. Boundaries keep you in your life. And so for me, that has been such a huge piece of it is like, yes, that is a shiny opportunity that sounds really good on paper. But a lot of times when I've said yes to those in the past, I arrive at that day or at that event and I wonder like, this was not the right decision or this was not aligned with what I say is really important to me.
And before we jumped on this call, we were both talking about having young kids. And I think for me, and I'll be curious if you feel the same, it's really important that when I'm working and when I'm putting those hours in during the day, I'm very focused on what I do. And I work from home, so I can be easily pulled into other things, family things and such, which happens, and that's okay to a certain extent. But what I try and do each and every day when I'm working is focus on the work. And then when I'm not working, put the work away and be present with the kids and the family. And I know you talked about this on another interview where you're reading a book to your daughter at night and you ended up at one point, she questioned something about what was happening in the book and you realized
like,
your head was elsewhere while you were reading that book to her, 100 times. So if we're not careful as entrepreneurs, because oftentimes we have these busy minds and all these different ideas, we can have our heads or even physically, we can be in different places and basically dilute ourselves all over the place. So I think it's so important for me, and I'm guessing for you, to make sure I'm physically and mentally in the spot I am and focused on what's in front of me.
Yes. It's funny. Each year I pick like a different word or phrase. And I remember as a mom, the first year I like had this phrase of be here now, because a lot of times when I'm working, I'm thinking about motherhood. And when I'm momming, I'm thinking about work. And I think that's really where like parental guilt stems from, is because you feel like you're half in on everything, right? There's no worse feeling than feeling like you are doing so much, but like, again, you're missing the point. And I've had to adopt this practice of like, when I cross a threshold into a room, I ask myself, what is my purpose for being here right now? And it's like, if I enter in the house, if I step into an office, like what am I and how am I all here right now so that I can be all in on all the areas of my life? And so I think that's a really big thing, because we have, I think too with the pandemic, it's like you switch from like I can switch from like mom mode to work mode in like a 2-second time zone, and you don't know what's happening behind the scenes for people. And while that's a blessing, it can really disrupt like your thoughtfulness and your attention to what you're doing. And so when you have opportunities to really be all in and present, I think that's what we really want, is a more present and peaceful life. And so that takes a lot of focus and awareness. And like, it's like you almost have to be a thought shepherd in bringing your thoughts back to where you are and where you're supposed to be in that moment of time.
And speaking on focus, this ties into what we talked about before as an entrepreneur, with different opportunities and being able to say no and not dilute ourselves.
Yeah.
For me, I'd be curious if this is the same for you as well, where when it comes to work, I think part of the success I've had with this show and what I do is that I keep my lane very narrow. Coming back to the bowling analogy.
Yeah.
When people ask what I do, it's this podcast, and I put everything into a narrow focus rather than trying to, do writing on the side for blog posts. And again, we could get into all the different opportunities, but at least this phase in my life, this is my focus, trying to perfect the craft of being an interviewer and putting everything into each and every one of these chats. So I'm curious if you found that, and if over your career you found yourself diluting at times and having to pull back your focus.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So I was recently in a room filled with women, and I was like, how many of you are multi-passionate? And like every single hand goes up, and I'm like, good. That means you're alive. Like we should be, people that have all of these different passions. And in my book too, I outline, I have been an entrepreneur for over a decade, and I have done many different things. So I have been a photographer. I had a watercolor print shop. I have the #1 marketing podcast. I've now wrote a book. I've done coaching and teaching and all these different things. And someone once asked me, well, how have you been able to find success in each zone of it? And it's because I've become so proficient in one thing before I move on to the next. And I'm a huge systems, strategies, efficiency type person. So I'm like, can I create a system? Can I create a workflow? Can I create something that can be handed to someone else? And can I only show up where it is required that I physically or personally show up? And I remember after having my daughter, I'd gone from, this entrepreneurial journey where it's like I had unlimited time to work. I could, invest all my time into this one thing, to all of a sudden I'm like a nap time warrior, right? Like my time is expanding. I can get so much done in a 3-hour nap window, and it's different, right? I'm like, what did I do with all that time before, man? And I realized in that a lot of times people that are multi-passionate, that are entrepreneurial by nature, they don't realize that there are only 2 things that they can do. And that is be the visionary of the vision and be the voice and the face behind that, right? There are a lot of things that you could get support in, whether it's writing show notes or booking guests or even doing research, linking up different things that you share in your show. There's so many different things that you, Jessie Chappas, you don't have to do on your own. But no one else can record this podcast for you. No one else can be the vision of here's where this is going, because it's coming from you. And so there's this chapter in my book about asking for help, because for so much of my life, I'm a proud girl. I am the woman who you don't offer to put my suitcase in the thing. I got this. I love that you're, trying to help, but I can do this. I'm very independent. And for so much of my life and my journey, I thought that asking for help was a weakness. But I really had to learn, and I think motherhood humbled me in so many ways, that asking for help is an opportunity to provide someone else to use their strength. And a lot of us are walking around, specifically parents, where they say that line, it takes a village. And you're like, And my village has lived under this roof with me for the last few years because we can't have a village, right? Like we found ourselves in these really interesting circumstances as young parents. And so for me, I've really had to learn, like in my business, I am a multi-passionate leader. However, there are only two things that I am responsible for: the vision of where we're going and being the face and the voice behind the brand. The people that I invite into my world to help me, they are the missionaries. I am the visionary. They are helping me with this mission. And so if you are listening to this and you realize, whether it's in your life, in your health journey, in your family, or in your business or career, that you don't have help, this is your push to really get honest with yourself about where you could use support and how you can invite that and usher that into your life.
Coming back to the story in the book, let's talk about your specific story of hiring your first virtual assistant.
Yeah.
Again, you had the resistance. Wild. You got to a point when you were, I think, curled up on your bed and you basically had no other option. You needed to make a pivot and you went for it. So talk about what that was like and what that felt like.
Yeah. So I was about 3 or 4 years into my photography business, and this sweet woman named Caitlin had reached out to me. She was like, I live in your area. I support other photographers. I know the business. Like, I would love to help you. And I very politely, because I'm from Minnesota, was like, thanks, but no thanks. And she was persistent, bless her. And the third time she reached out, I was in probably one of the darkest seasons of my life. So we had tried to grow our family, and we had one pregnancy loss. And I was planning my entire life around my business. Like, I had this deep desire for parenthood. And yet, as a wedding photographer, I had this small window of a year where I could get pregnant and still do my job, right? And so we had a pregnancy loss, waited an entire year, tried again. And the day that Caitlin emailed me saying, I'm here to help, was the day that I was knocked to my knees and required it. We had just found out that we had lost our second pregnancy. I literally had walked out of the doctor's office after hearing there's no heartbeat for a second time. And she had emailed saying, I'm here to help. And I remember just being in this place where I was like, the universe, God, my life literally humbled me in such a way that like I couldn't go on without help. And it was such this moment of surrender, because I think a lot of us are white knuckling aspects of our life right now. Like, we are clinging for dear life, when really, if we open our hands, there's so much more possibility on the other side of it. And I remember giving her, access to my email inbox and just saying, please just serve my clients well. Like, I can't even open up Gmail right now. And the feeling of lightness and freedom that accompanied getting help. And that really started a lot of my health journey in that season of loss. There were so many things, and I talk about this in my book, where it's like my body was trying to get my attention and talk to me and tell me, like, the way you are doing things is not sustainable. The way you are doing things is not supporting your life. And it was a huge wake-up call for me, and really started a lot of investigation on my part, both in the privacy of my heart, but also with the help of doctors and things. And so it was just a really interesting season, but it really unlocked this feeling that is only possible when you invite people in on your mission with you, when you don't go through life alone. And now I have a team of 10 women, and I can't imagine doing what I do without them. Like, whenever I talk about anything we do, it's always a we statement, because it's not just me. Like, I'm not self-made. I am literally standing on the shoulders of the people below me who are helping me do this type of work, which is amazing.
I do the same thing. Use we.
Yeah. All the time. Like, I said that about my book, and they're like, oh, did like everyone write it? And I was like, no, but like we were all a part of it. Like, I love that.
So Jen, I know part of your story too was actually moving states back to Minnesota, back home. I'm curious, was this right around the time when, we're talking about getting help? Was part of that to be closer to family to get help? And where along the journey was that?
Yeah. So after my second loss, I was in this place of life where I knew I had to like face my grief. I feel like with my first loss, I just buried it under and was like, oh, this was just 1 in 4 women go through this. But the second time it was like, no, something's going on. And this woman had reached out to me and said, I've been where you've been and I just want to help you through this. Would you be willing to get on the phone with me just once a week and let's talk about it? Like, where are you holding on to grief in your body? Like what do you need to let go of? I want to be a safe space to not just ask you, how are you, but to be there for how are you really? And she led me through this life-changing visualization exercise where she had me close my eyes and envision the most vibrant version of myself. And I remember literal words she was using. I was sitting in this blue chair and she was saying, picture yourself like fully vibrant and energized and excited about life. Like you are your best self. You are energetically aligned. You are doing work you love. You are with the people who matter the most to you. And she set this scene in a way that was just like so visceral. Like I could hear this little girl giggling and I could smell pancakes and I could see this red Persian rug. And it was just, everything about it was just so clear. And I think a lot of times when you experience loss in any form of your life, you almost lose your ability to dream. Like you don't want to hold visions too closely because they've been ripped away before. And what's to say that that won't happen again? And it was the first time that I like invited myself to really go there. And I remember her saying like, see what you're wearing, all these things. And in my vision, I was wearing this white linen top and these specific jeans. And I remember when she said, okay, now open your eyes. I opened my eyes and I looked down and I had on these like ratty old yoga pants and this t-shirt. And I had this moment where I was like, I can't produce a giggling girl. And I sure as heck like don't have a Persian rug right now, but I can clothe myself in the identity of someone that's ready for those things. And I think a lot of times in our lives, we find ourselves out of control. We talked about that feeling of uncertainty. It's like where anxiety lives. And because we feel out of control, we don't take control of the things that we can. And I remember just having this moment of like, if that is my most vibrant self, why am I not wearing those jeans today? Why am I waiting for the girl and the pancakes and the Persian rug to start showing up as what I believe is the most vibrant version of me? And it's really funny today because a lot of times when we take photos as a family or if I show up on stages, I wear jeans and a white linen top because that is me. Like that is the best version of me. And I don't wait for the things that I want in my life. I start showing up as that person today. And I recognize a lot that in waiting seasons, because I think every single person listening to this is in a waiting season, whatever that looks like for them, whether it's waiting for a relationship or a career change or a health move, we waste those seasons. But I can see that the work that we do in those waiting seasons is sometimes just as important as what it is that we're waiting for.
That makes sense. And Jenna, talk about when that finally became realized, that dream you had and you were actually living it and feeling it. Take us there.
So that day, I realized that the vision that I had was not in the house we were living in. The house that we were living in had become this place where it just reminded me of where we weren't yet. Like I had to walk past this bedroom that I had thought of having children in every single time I went into my room. And I realized like I feel stuck here. And that day I started looking on Zillow and my husband was out on a run and I texted my family this house listing and I said, maybe this will be our house. And I had not lived in my home state for over a decade. So my parents had kind of kissed that notion goodbye. And within minutes, my phone was going off the hook. My family was like, come home, come home. And Drew gets back from his run and he's like, what is going on my phone? Like your family text thread is going nuts. And I said, did you see the listing? And he's like, what listing? And I was like, I found this house. And he said, well, we're going to move there eventually. We might as well move there now. And it was something we had never talked about. And a few weeks later, we went and viewed that house. And I was like, this is the house for my vision. Like, this is it. And what was crazy, Jesse, is that the day after we moved in, it was months and months later, the day after we moved in, I found out I was pregnant. And I ended up having a baby girl. And even just yesterday, we were in the kitchen and my 3.5-year-old was cheersing Drew with some coffee. And I just started crying. And she always sees them. She's like happy tears. But I think there's something so cool about being awake to your life. Because I think a lot of times when you talk to people who are, on their deathbed or in their final moments of life, they say like, I missed it. Like those good old days, like I didn't even realize they were good until now I can see it. And my deep desire in the work that I do is for people to wake up to their life, to have those happy tears, to be awake to like, this is what I dreamed of. This is what I hope for. I'm in it. I'm experiencing it right now as I'm living it. And so every time we make pancakes, Drew looks at me and we just lock eyes because I'm like, this is it. This is a vision. And I'm like it's happening and I'm here.
That's so beautiful. And one thing I want to point out is, you made a radical step. You moved states, you moved into a new house. And for everybody, it's going to be different. It doesn't necessarily mean people need to do that. But you talked about people on their deathbed, like life is short. And you're at least going to be able to look back and realize that you went for it. And it seems like from what I'm hearing, it turned out to be a beautiful thing, which is amazing. But life is short. And when you feel that urge or that calling, it's at least worth listening to and feeling out. And don't quickly dismiss it just because it's a big thing. Because again, life is short. Go for it if that's what your heart's telling you to do.
Yes, there's this line in my book that it's like, you don't have to change zip codes. You don't have to go big, but you have to go. And I think that's like so powerful. It's like even just one step in that direction builds up your confidence to make that leap. And for us, it was a big leap and it wasn't easy. Like I had to move an entire business. Like we had a whole community. Like it wasn't just this like, I'm just going to move houses. But it was just one of those things where it was like the vision was so clear that we were both bought into it, that it was like, let's do it. Let's go for it.
Well, let's talk a bit more about that both bought into it piece, because I wanted to get into that next.
Yeah.
You guys, from the book, it's very obvious how in love you guys are and how supportive.
Yeah. Talk
about how important that's been along your journey, because again, you share quite a bit of your story going from retail all the way to what you are today. And you've had Drew along for the whole journey, and he's been so supportive. So I want to get into that facet and how critical that's been for your success.
Yeah. I share this story. Do you play cribbage? Do you and Marnie play cribbage? Or do you know what cribbage is?
It's something I've dabbled with a couple times, but I have never fully got into it. But I'm open to it.
Okay. I'll have to send you a cribbage board. So there's this chapter in the book about cribbage, and it's this card and board game that we play in Minnesota. My grandpa actually taught it to me when I was really young, and it helped me learn math. And I remember when we were planning our wedding, we were 22 years old, and the pastor, we were joking around how Drew and I would go on dates and we played cribbage, and we had this cribbage board, and on the back we would inscribe who had won a certain amount of games. And I don't remember a lot from our wedding day. It's such a blur, but I do remember my pastor saying, "It's done. You're done keeping score. Stop inscribing who has tallied up so many points. You're done. You aren't opponents, you're a team." And I feel like this has been something that has been huge in parenthood, because a lot of times, especially with parents and young kids, someone does things a little differently than the other person would do them. And a lot of times I have to remind myself, we're not opponents, we're not competitors, we're a team. We want the same thing. A lot of the times we want the same thing. And in my journey of entrepreneurship, it has required a lot of baton passing. I think of us as almost being on a relay where it's like, you go, I go, you go, I go. What does this look like? And my husband, Drew, is a stay-at-home dad, which I think is probably the hardest job in the world. And he has had to defer his dreams often because I'm in the pursuit of mine. And it was really interesting, Jesse, because, it took me about 2 years to write the book. And I did not let Drew read it until the week before it came out, because it felt so personal to have the person who has walked with you through so many of those experiences read it. But also because there were pieces of it that I had never shared with him, in the sense of like, his dream was to be a stay-at-home dad. And when we were going through our season of loss, I felt like I was dropping the baton, right? Like his deep desire is to stay at home with children, and I can't create the children. So here I am, a failure. And I don't think I was ever able to express those things to him, because he had his own grief. Plus he was trying to help me through my grief. And it was just a season where it was just like, everything was so heavy, but we had to have this shared vision where it's almost like your partner turns the light on when it gets too dark for you and says, remember, the view is going to be worth it. It's like a hike. And it's like, you get to those twisty parts of the trail and you're like, let's just go back. Let's just go back. And, it's been really beautiful because I was recently asked on an episode, like, what do you do if your partner is just as ambitious as you are? And I said, oh gosh, Drew is super ambitious. His ambition shows up in a different way, right? And for us, it's been this constant of sharing our why and making it so strong that the other person buys into it. The day that I came home and told Drew that I was going to write a book was actually on our 10-year anniversary. I had booked us massages. We're in a town of 1,200 in the northernmost tip of Minnesota. And this woman who's very intuitive told me at our 10-year massage that she said, there's something you need to do and you know what it is and you're not doing it. And it was write a book. And I remember coming home from my massage because we had a kid. So it was like, you go, then I go, much like our life. I come home from the massage and Drew's like, how was it? And I was like, I'm going to write a book. And he's like, how did going to a massage tell you that you're going to write a book? This isn't on your vision board. This isn't a thing. But I had to have him buy into the why and make it so strong that like I knew with certainty this was the next step for me. How do I invite him to be a part of the process? And I think a lot of times when people are trying to change their life or change their identity or change their career, when you don't have somebody supportive in your corner, it's so hard, right? You're watching the one person who should want the best for you resist the change for you. And a lot of times we just write it off and say they're not going to be supportive, but we don't actually think about how can I invite them into this journey? Because the reason that they might not be supportive is that they're scared that when we change, we're going to leave them behind. And so it's been this process of, I'm going to do this really hard thing and it's actually going to, impact our marriage and me as a mom and all these things. But like, here's why I believe this is what's next for me. And here's how you can support this. And here's where I want to invite you to share what your dreams are. And I think that that's been a really big key for us is being in constant conversation about where we're headed and making sure that it's together.
Oh, that's beautiful. But for somebody who does take a similar approach and the partner just isn't buying in,
yeah.
Is there any other strategies that they can layer onto that?
How do you anchor yourself to it that you just show up for yourself? What I mean by that is it doesn't mean abandon all the other roles you play or the people in your life. But again, when we look back at boundaries, what sort of boundaries do you need to create in your life to keep you in alignment with who you're made to become? And one thing that I think we forget is that in a world that is so obsessed with before and afters, we're so obsessed with, like, think about this, Jesse. Like, I scroll on Instagram and it's like this weight loss transformation. And the first things we ask are the what and the how. What did they do and how did they get there? And I think that we're missing the most important question, the why. Why was this the time that they actually transformed that way? What was their why that was strong enough for them to anchor them? Because that transformation wasn't easy. And so for people that are moving through life, not feeling supported, I want for you to figure out how can you anchor yourself to your own why, but how can you keep inviting people in on the transformation itself? Because a lot of times we want to wait until the after to say, I told you so. I told you this would be worth it. I told you that this was going to be. That we forget that along the way, we might be piquing someone's interest. The transformation itself might be what motivates someone, not the after photo. And so I constantly want to invite people into the messy middle. I know we sometimes struggle with some relationships with family who we can talk to them about the weather and sports all day and night. But when it comes to anything of substance, it's like they retreat. And we used to get so frustrated by it that we would just deviate and talk about the weather and sports. Like, why complicate this? But instead, we started challenging them to enter into difficult conversations, to ask questions. And what we uncovered is that they couldn't relate to our lives because they were living lives that were totally opposite. And when we had stopped inviting them for some time, our relationship was so surface level. I think a lot of people feel that right now. It's like, how do we dive deeper? How do we get past this? And you can't stop inviting people in. You don't know what you'll unlock or when you'll hit them in a place where they see that you are moving through a messy middle to get to that after, and that they're invited to be a part of the journey with you.
And this ties into the title of the book, How Are You Really?
Yeah.
Adding that little extra word totally changes the depth of that question. So let's get deeper into this. Let's talk about some of these difficult conversations and creating situations and conversations with family and friends that go below the surface and what can come of that.
Yeah. It's so funny, Jesse, because your little one is right around the same age as mine. And a lot of people say writing a book is like birthing a baby. And I'm like, well, cool, because I did both at the same time. And we were at the final stages of my book and we still hadn't landed on a name. And I kept telling people, like, I hate small talk. I hate it. My husband is the most proficient small talker of all time, which is why we are very different. And I kept describing it to people and saying, this book is like the difference of, when you're at the grocery store and the cashier says, how are you? And you just say good, because you know that they don't want to hold space or actually hear the answer that maybe you're not okay. And it's the difference when you're with a safe friend that you trust and you get past the surface stuff and you lean in and you feel safe and they say, but how are you really? And finally, someone in my life was like, that's the book. That's the title. And I'm like, no way, wait. And when we landed on it, it felt so good because, one, I think we don't ask ourselves that question enough. How am I really? But two, we crave depth, but we don't create safe spaces for people to go deep. And what I mean by that is I tell this story in the book, about a cashier at a grocery store. And it was when I was pregnant with my daughter. It was my third pregnancy. And the cashier goes, oh, is that your first? And I had this moment of like mental battle where I was like, if only she knew this is my third, this is a miracle. Like, I am so grateful. But then I'm like, the cashier at Super One Foods does not want to hear about my journey of loss, right? But I felt so out of integrity saying, yeah, this is my first, like, oh, I'm due in a few weeks. And I feel like we're going through life lacking that integrity because when people ask how we are, it's like we just give them what they want because we don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. But in making people feel comfortable with the surface level, we're not inviting them to say, make me uncomfortable. Tell me how you really are. Tell me what's keeping you up at night. And there's this line in the book that just says, like, in order to grow yourself, you have to know yourself. And I've really found that, like, we are a world that is so obsessed with personal development, but we don't take the time to know ourselves as a person. We want to develop, we want the systems, we want the strategies, we want the tools and tactics, but we don't actually ask ourselves, like, is this for me? Does this speak to me? Does this reach me? Is this built for me? Is this created for me? And so we kick ourselves because we buy all the self-help books out there thinking they're going to help us, but we don't even know ourselves. And so that was really where the book came from. And this deep desire in it is to get past the surface level and to get honest with ourselves, but not just get honest and say, man, I'm not where I thought I'd be, but like, here's how I actually get to where I want to go.
And this ties back in what we opened up talking about, the fact that we have these different layers of parenting and education that we can become lost from who we truly are. And then again, with these surfacey conversations we're having with most of the people in our life, we're not really seeing who they truly are. And there's just so many masks being worn. And I think a big part of this too is when we're open and vulnerable and really connecting on a deep level, we can realize that we're not alone because, the human experience is a deep experience and there's a lot of different thoughts and feelings and a lot going on up here. And basically, if we're just being surfacey, it can make us feel like we're an N of one, an isolated experience, rather than connect with people in a deeper way. And again, the right people at the right time in the right setting, but then realizing, we have a lot more in common than what we're leading each other to believe.
Yeah. It's kind of like on Instagram where you like clear the clutter and take the picture and it's beautiful. But when you zoom out, there's piles of crap everywhere. That's kind of how we're living our lives. It's like we're presenting the facade. We eat with our eyes first. We're presenting this certain version of our reality. But when we kind of pull the curtain back, there's a lot more to us. And I think that you have to be willing to go there first, right? Like I sometimes breathe a sigh of relief when somebody's like, oh, I'm really struggling right now. And it's like, oh my gosh, me too. Like I thought I was the only one like this. And I think a lot of times it takes an act of bravery or courage to go first and just say, I'm not okay, or this is really bugging me. And one thing that I've noticed is, and it's beautiful and also heartbreaking at the same time, is that our generation is raised with so much awareness. I don't know if you feel this with parenting, but like I follow all of these different parenting accounts of like emotional intelligence, say this, don't say this, like don't, like don't give your kids a complex about these things or like whatever it is. And there's so much beautiful awareness, which I think is incredible because with information comes power. But at the same point too, because we're aware that people have it worse than us or that we're really lucky or that there are so many things going well in our lives that we approach so many conversations with caveats, right? Like it'd be like me being like, gosh, Jesse, I'm having a really hard time, but I'm so lucky. My kids are healthy. I have a great husband. I have a roof over my head. And we almost like discredit what's actually hard in our lives because of this awareness. And I think that we are really craving like caveat-less relationships where people know that you're fortunate. I know, Jesse, you are grateful as a dad. I know you are so lucky to have 2 kids, but that doesn't mean that there's still not hard times, right? And so it's like, that's where I think a lot of times we get it wrong is because we are so aware and so grateful, which are both very beautiful things in and of itself. But a lot of times that gratitude can keep us stuck from being really honest with like, I am struggling or this is hard. And I know people have it worse, but this is hard for me right now.
Essentially, what you're saying is not comparing your troubles with others. Because, if we dig deep enough and watch the news, we're going to find somebody who's going through worse times. And then we're just going to discount the trouble,
what's going
whatever
on.
It is, for getting your credit card at home or getting a flat tire, things that in the big scheme of things aren't a big deal, but they are.
Yeah, exactly.
So for somebody who is ready to make these deeper connections, if this is a totally foreign concept to them and they're not used to doing it, how do they begin?
Okay, so I want to share this example first, and then I'm going to give you an actual template that you can steal and deploy today. So when I had my second daughter, Quinn, I recognized this wild phenomenon, and it's not reserved just for mothers. I looked at my text messages that were coming in from really well-intentioned people. A lot of them were my friends. Half of them would say, oh my gosh, aren't you just in newborn bliss? Oh, you're soaking it in. This is my favorite. The other half would say, oh, those sleepless nights, just hang in there. You're going to be okay. I know it's so hard. And I recognize that a lot of times when we enter conversations, we do so expressing what we believe people are experiencing, right? Like we set the precedent of what we think someone's experience should be. When we do that, we don't invite someone to say where they're at. So when someone would say, aren't you in newborn bliss? And here I was exhausted trying to figure out how do I parent a toddler and a baby at the same time and take care of myself, I'd feel like a failure. And when people would say, oh, those sleepless nights, but really I was just inspecting every knuckle of my newborn, thinking of the miracle she was, I felt like things should be harder than they were. And both of those contribute to the guilt that we were talking about. And so I adopted this practice that has changed my life and changed my friendships. And I want every single listener to do this today. When I think of someone, because throughout my day, I'll see a commercial or I'll see a different type of food and I'll think of someone, they'll pop into my brain, right? We do that all the time. I'll text them and I'll say, hey, no need to reply. I just want you to know I'm thinking of you. And if you want, on a scale of 1 to 10, tell me where you're at today so that I can show up appropriately for you. And what this does is if somebody's at a 1, they're at a low, I know that I can step in and support. And if somebody's at a 9 or a 10, heck, I can celebrate the heck out of them. But just leaving the space and the scale to say, here's where I'm at today, has absolutely transformed the depth of relationships, but also given people a safe space to know if I'm at a 2 today and I need someone, I can just text Jenna that I'm at a 2. I don't have to explain it. I don't even have to tell her why. I just want her to know that like she can be thinking of me or praying for me today. And I love that because a lot of times we watch people's lives online and we assume we know everything going on, or we, imply what we think someone should be experiencing because of what's unfolding in their lives. And when we do that, we don't leave room for them to say how they're really doing. And so it's totally transformed things. And it's been a really cool experience because a lot of times when I reach out to people, I find that they're either really at a low point or they're really at a high point and they just wanted someone with them.
I love that. Where did you come up with it, or where did you find it?
I just had wished that somebody would ask me that, because on a moment by moment basis, it could change, especially as a new mom. I feel like as a new mom in that postpartum period, you can go so fast from a 1 to a 10 that I wanted people to catch me where I was at in that moment instead of assuming where they thought I should be.
And when it comes to the depth of these connections with other people in our lives, you mentioned social media before. I think we have these extra layers in the 21st century. One being social media, where people are often posting, their best pictures and filtering. And then coming out of the pandemic, which we're still kind of at the tail end of, where we're disconnected. And then just our general human tendency to, just keep our talk pretty small when we're at least interacting with strangers. We just have all these layers that are unfortunately blocking the deeper connection. So I just think in this time, it's especially important that we make that extra effort to connect deeper with the people in our lives.
Yes. I actually have also taken into practice, like, hey, I've been following you on social media, but tell me what's going on behind the scenes. Because a lot of times we take what we see online as face value and like just assume like that's it for what's going on in somebody's life. And when I wrote my book, I did so in silence. Like I didn't tell a soul that it was going on. And so if people were just following my life online, they would have had no idea that behind the scenes I was working on this really hard, awesome, amazing, exciting project. And so it really taught me of like, you only know what people show you. And a lot of times people don't show the hard. And so that's like that opportunity to step in. There's this line in my book that says like, loneliness isn't being in isolation. Loneliness is being surrounded, but not fully known. And I feel like that touches on this topic in the sense of a lot of times we're lonely and we're like telling ourselves like, I shouldn't be lonely. Like my family's right here, or I'm in the office and everyone's around me. But I think that loneliness stems from that feeling of like, people don't know who I really am, or like they don't know all the facets of me or all the roles I play. And I think that also comes from this desire of like compartmentalizing different pieces of you. Like Jesse as a dad is different than Jesse as a host, than Jesse as a partner. But at the same point too, like you are all Jesse. And so it's like, how do you figure out ways to like bring your full self in to let people see the other facets of you? How do you let your children see the work side of Jesse? And how do you let your family into, you as a partner and things like that? And I think it just gives the people in our lives a more multidimensional look at us as a human as well.
And I think the important first step is really to do that work ourselves and realize who we are. Because if we don't know that, then how are we going to show up as our true selves and connect with other people in their true essence?
Yeah, I love that.
Jen, I want to go back to a part of your story where you talked about burnout. And I think there's an experience a lot of entrepreneurs have along their journey. And what I'm curious about is when you made that realization, what are some of the practical steps you took to tiptoe back out? Because one thing I really noticed from reading your book and admire, and I want to get into this a little bit too, is at least at this stage in your career, the lifestyle and the freedom that you and Drew have built, you've really prioritized the freedom and the balance, which is just so admirable, especially at this point in your career where you again, coming back to all the opportunities. So let's start with the burnout phase. Take us back there.
Yeah.
And let's talk about what you did, because this will be really practical and helpful for a lot of people that might be heading that way, or maybe they're at the climax too, that you got to.
So I was recently listening to a meditation, and in it, the person said, and I loved this, and it said like, for all of us, there was a fire, and for many of us, we feel like ashes. And I think that's where burnout brings us, right? Literally to these ashes. And it went on to say like, all it takes is one ember and the right fanning of the flame to bring the fire back. And I thought it was just such a beautiful illustration of burnout, and where I think a lot of people are collectively coming out of the world that we've been in. It's like who has had time to be passionate? We're just in survival mode, right? We're figuring out this new reality. We're navigating change after change after change. And I think a lot of us are sitting here feeling like ashes. And that's why I think sometimes it's easy to roll our eyes at those notions of like, just pursue your passions. Because it's like, I don't even know what I'm passionate about. Like, what is passion? And so for me, every single time in my life that I've either gotten to burnout or felt that burnout is coming, I've had to intentionally place a finish line in my realm of reality. And what that looks like. And I'm even nearing a finish line right now in my life. And it's something that I put in very proactively to protect myself from burnout, because launching a book is no small feat. And I am so proud of the way that I did it. Like Jessie, have been so energized throughout this process. I have done more than I ever thought I would do. And yet I have enjoyed every minute of it. And I say that with utter conviction. Like I wish every author could feel what I feel, because it is the best I've ever felt and the busiest I've ever been in my career. And yet nothing has been sacrificed in that. And how I've done that is, I kind of shared that story about how I hit 6 figures. And I remember that day I was in the shower washing my hair with the same herbal essence and thinking, I thought this would feel different. I thought this would feel different. I thought the angels would be singing and someone would hand me like a certificate saying, congratulations, you finally earned 6 figures. And nothing changed in my life. Like no value was added with the extra zeros in the bank account. And that was when I had that realization of like, wait, I was way happier when I made less, but when I worked less. Like, how do I get back to that? And for me, it has always been this area of belief of like, what is enough? What is enough? Because I think that burnout happens when we're constantly in pursuit of more. And don't get it twisted. I am not a complacent person in the least, but I have realized that being content is feeling peace and ease in the moment while still being in pursuit of where you want to go. And for so much of my life, I thought that the moment that I said I'm content was the moment that I'd just given up. Like that was it. And what I want people to do is figure out what is enough for you. Where is the line in the sand? Where do you draw that finish line in for yourself and say, well done, you, now rest? There is this chapter in the book called My Soul Shavasana. And I talk about how when I used to practice yoga, I did so with this like gymnast mentality. I was a really good gymnast. I went on to be a collegiate diver. I dove all years in college. I was really good. And when I did yoga, I did it from this performance standpoint. It was like this comparative, like I would look around the room, like I can do this bend better than anyone. I can hold a handstand. No one else can do this. And I remember that when the Shavasana, the laying at the end of the practice would come, I couldn't do it. I hated it. If it wouldn't have been rude, I would have walked out, because being still with myself, I felt like I had to earn it. And I felt like rest was something that wasn't a requirement. That was something that I had to work hard enough to get to. And the problem with that notion, especially for ambitious people, is that you are constantly putting rest off, right? You'll say, someday I'll rest, or I'm working so hard today so that someday I can rest. And rest is a birthright and it's a requirement. And whether it comes in the form of your body shutting down, or, there's health signals that tell you like, no, this isn't going to work anymore. Rest has to be something that is in your life that isn't earned or deserved, but that is just a piece of your practice. And I had to learn how to lay flat on the floor for 5 minutes with myself. And I work with a lot of high achievers. Like the people in my sphere of influence are some of the biggest names that you would recognize. And so many of them are the worst at resting because they are always in pursuit of more. And I've been sitting at tables where I might not be the greatest earner, but I am without a doubt the most at peace and the most enjoying the journey that I am on. And that to me is success. And so what I have learned is that success for me is not a figure, it's a feeling. And I am most successful when I am feeling peaceful and at ease in my life. And so I have had to create parameters in my life, boundaries in my life, draw lines in the sand, create finish lines that I actually allow myself to cross so that I can keep that feeling. Because let me tell you, I have made millions of dollars in my life. And I was just as happy when I made $50,000. I found this box of letters, Jessie, the other day, and I just loved seeing them. I save everything. And they were from all these various, milestones in my life. And they were letters that Drew and I had written to each other. And it was like, even in the darkest seasons, even in the seasons when we were paying off student loans and working multiple jobs, like we loved our lives. Like we enjoyed them. And so much of what's wrong with what we're doing these days is like, we're reserving things for someday. And like you said earlier, like life is so short. And so how do we define enough so that we can allow ourselves rest and enjoyment? And part of the problem is that we are so obsessed with efficiency, right? Like we want to get more done in less time. But the problem with that is that we're getting more done in less time so that we can get more done. And the more is more work. It's not more joy and more rest and more memories and more time. And so it's like, how can we reevaluate what success doesn't look like, but what it should feel like in our lives? And how can we figure out ways to draw these enough points and say, and here, well done. Now is time to enjoy. Now is time to rest. So after this interview, I'm taking like a month off. And I'm not saying I'm not going to be working. I'm saying I have just carved out that boundary to say, I'm going to enjoy summer with my family. I've worked hard. I've done all these things. And now, well done. Take a little time to catch your breath again before you get running again. And I think that's really powerful.
That is so beautiful. And for you, getting to that point, was it just hitting burnout that made you have that realization? Or did you always have a tidbit, but you kind of pushed the boundaries a little bit at that time when you burnt out? Because it seems like, hearing you talk about it, you have this deep passion around this subject and understanding and conviction, which is just so beautiful. Talk about if that was innate at all, or if this was just from, pushing too hard.
I think I'm an old soul. My mom has always said that. I feel like my youngest daughter is an old soul as well. But that one hitting of burnout was so brutal, where I think it was this realization of like, there's this line in the book where it was like, I had quit the ladder climb. Like I had left the field, but I didn't quit the game. Like I was still playing the game. I just ended up building my own ladder as an entrepreneur, right? And again, that's that notion of like you leave the 9 to 5 in order to work 24/7. And that's kind of the narrative of entrepreneurship. But that whole 6 figures thing was just such a wake up call to me, because I had thought that I'd put this finish line of like this massive thing and it was going to change my life and everything was going to be different when I woke up the next day, and when it wasn't. And when I asked myself, how do I actually feel right now? It was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I took what I was passionate about and now like I don't even want to do it. And same thing with when we experienced our losses. I remember this moment where we found out we were going to experience our second loss, and I had to show up and shoot a wedding the next day. And I remember thinking, man, I built something that to the world is so successful, but I am stuck. Like if I don't show up, it's over. And I don't want to build something that doesn't allow me to have a human moment, because I'm a human. And I think, what a privilege, 100%, that I've built something that can run while I rest. But it didn't happen accidentally, right? And for people listening right now that think, man, whoa, like imagine, like you could step away for a month and not worry. It's not by accident, but it's also not reserved only for me. And when I wrote my book, How Are You Really? The first manuscript I wrote was actually a business book. And I remember when my editor read it and then my agent read it, and they both work 9 to 5 jobs. And they said, no, we need this book. It's not about business. It's about life. And they said, we need this reminder that like this full life isn't just reserved for the special few. Like you can live a full life and be awake to your life, whether you are a stay-at-home parent or you work a 9 to 5 or you are a caregiver or you are an entrepreneur. This is unlocking an actual life. And that to me was so huge. And so, yes, burnout led me to that thing, but I also got sick of hearing all of these stories of burnout and wondering, does everyone just need to reach this point to have the breakthrough, or can we find it before we get to that point? And I believe that you can find it. I don't think you have to hit burnout to have the breakthrough. I think that you have to be checking in with yourself on the journey to catch where you're starting to head in that direction and to course correct. And in doing that, it's literally adopting the practice of checking in and saying, how am I really? Or how does this really feel? Or who am I really? Or who do I have?
And you mentioned having this upcoming month off to recharge and refill your batteries, which is amazing. Kudos to you. What are some of the things you'll do self-care wise to replenish during that time? And then just even though you have the balance thing down and being a major pillar in your life, day to day, what are some of those things you do on a day when you might have to push it a little bit harder and do an extra podcast interview or whatever it is? So basically what I'm getting at here is self-care practices that keep you full during times off and then during times when you're on.
Okay, I'm so glad you asked this, Jesse, because my word of the year this year was vibrant. Like I told you, my word before was like presence. This word was vibrant. And I am someone who has been on a huge health journey this year, which is so exciting to me. Like I am just obsessed. I'm going off the deep end in the best way possible. I've actually listened to your podcast for years and years and years. And so to be a guest on it just feels extra special. But after I had my second daughter, I gave myself a 6-month runway to really figure out how do I embody the word vibrant, but also how do I support my energy that is going to be required to do over 100 interviews about a book and to show up like literally, Jesse, I have this right now. I have a breast pump attached to my body because I'm still nursing my child while navigating through this. That was important to me. And how do I show up as an engaged mom at the end of the day? I can run around and chase my kids and not be so exhausted. And I really had to figure out ways to support my energy. And so what was really interesting for me as an achiever is that I went on this really big health journey. I hired a dietitian. I used CGMs. I started getting into biohacking. I had to equip myself with a team. And I think a lot of times people don't talk about that enough of like, when you are a high performer, like I feel like an athlete these days, and that amount of energy is required to today do 7 hours of recording, right? And so for me, what was really interesting for me is that I flipped my day on its head. And when I used to crack open my computer during my most productive times, I started using that as the times to like give me energy, fuel my body. I got a red light. I started meditating. I use a PEMF mat. I do like lymphatic things. I take the right nutrients and supplements. I absolutely transformed the way I eat. Sitting with me right here, I have bone broth. I have athletic greens. Like I had to change. And what's fascinating about it, Jesse, is I've never been in better health in my entire life. And in the past, when I used to get busy, my health was the first thing that would suffer. And instead, I said, the goal is energy. I just want energy to do all these things because my why is so deep on all of them. And that requires energy. And it absolutely unlocked this desire and this consistency for me to actually follow through with my health. And so it's been incredible because for anyone listening to the show, because I have been a listener for so long and I've always been like, what is wrong with me? Like I try this diet or I like follow all these rules and like I can never follow through. My why was always tied to the wrong things, losing weight, looking a certain way. All I went into this year saying is I want to feel a certain way. And dang it, I know when I'm feeling it and when I'm not. And so it's been really beautiful. So for this month off, like we as a family do a lot of biking and hiking, but like I also have been doing things like meditating and all like unlocking these ways to like just be energized. Because now that I have energy, I look at the last decade of my life and wonder, what could I have accomplished if I had put this thing first? Because energy is required to do big things in your life. And so it's been really, really cool for me. And I just feel better than I've ever felt before.
I love hearing this. I'm so happy for you. And what would you say?
Well, thanks for all the tools.
My pleasure. Jenna, I'm so happy for you. What amazing news. And you're still relatively young, so you can use all these tools and all this knowledge for the rest of your life. And with young kids, teach them. And just so happy for you. And I'm curious, what have been a couple of the biggest needle movers given all these new practices?
Okay, so the first one is meditation. And let me tell you, I have a neurodivergent brain. I have ADHD. I have always believed that I couldn't meditate. I mean, just like I couldn't do Shavasana, I was like, I cannot empty my brain. There's no way I can meditate. My brain operates in a different way. And I've recognized that meditation is not emptying your brain. It's having an awareness around your thoughts. And just that simple notion has absolutely transformed that for me. And one thing that I've been doing is that when I nurse my daughter, instead of sitting on my phone and scrolling, I meditate. And I also believe that that calming energy literally goes right into her. But it's been something that has been really beautiful for me. And so I like am on a streak of just meditating every day. It's been something that I've prioritized. And it's sometimes like these small pockets of time. But I feel like what's incredible is like my parasympathetic system can now drop in so fast that I can be like anywhere. And it's just like I can feel my body shift. And I think that's so huge. One, as like an achiever, a driver, to like really be in touch with your nervous system, but also to like remind your body, like, you are safe. I am home. We are here. And I think that also helps you answer those questions. The second thing is prioritizing protein. And I know, again, sounds so simple, but for me, like I was not eating enough protein and I wasn't really thinking about like the balance of my meals. I was someone who like, I don't eat breakfast and then I would go all day and all of a sudden I'd be starving and I'd go for starches and carbs. And so wearing a CGM really helped me watch my body's response to real-time food, but also to really understand like I need protein all the time. And along with that, the third thing is if somebody's listening to this and you're like me and you've struggled to either follow through or get the result you want, for me, I need to go past generalized knowledge and I need to know what will work for my body specifically. The more that I've been able to uncover my personal body and what works with it and what doesn't work with it, the easier it has been for me to follow through. So when I was able to do different testing or watch how my body responds to certain things, it made it a lot easier to let certain things go that were not working with my body any longer. Jesse, my brand used to be all about macaroni and cheese. Like I mean, I love pasta to this day, but like I used to talk about macaroni and cheese all the time. And then I found out that I can't eat gluten, or gluten doesn't serve my body. And it was wild because it was like, as soon as I knew that my body was just rejecting gluten, I went cold turkey. My why was so deep that I knew specifically my body cannot do this and I want to fuel my body in a beautiful way. And so I think for people that struggle sometimes, it's not lack of generalized knowledge, it's lack of knowledge around your specific body and what it needs. And I think that was really helpful for me as well.
That's such a good point. How did you feel after going gluten-free? Was it an
Oh
immediate
my gosh,
energy boost?
I haven't gone back. And it's wild because so during our losses and our fertility journey, that was when I really started digging into my health and finding out things like that. Like I never thought that a gluten intolerance would impact fertility, but it does. Your body is fighting what you're putting into it. And so it's just like understanding how all these things are so deeply intertwined has been just really, really eye-opening for me. But yeah, I don't eat gluten and I don't touch it. And I never have. Like even since the day I cut it, I've never like grabbed a piece of Domino's pizza and eaten it because I just know my body will not do well.
You're hardcore, just like in business.
That's right. That's right.
Love it.
I don't do anything half-heartedly.
I'm the same way, so I get it. Do you subscribe to a certain diet? Paleo or
No,
no?
I don't. I mean, besides being gluten-free, I don't. But, you know, it's just been really interesting because I've been working with like a functional dietitian, and that has been really helpful for me because I feel like I am a very black and white person, like we just said, and I've had to invite in shades of gray in my life that make it so I can just keep on the path. And so in the past, when I would do extreme diets or things like that, or, you know, like just try to subscribe to a specific perfect way of eating, one, it just really triggers like disordered tendencies in me because I am obsessive. But two, the second that I fell off the bandwagon, I'd fall really hard off of it. And so I've had to learn to say like, today wasn't an optimal day, but tomorrow can be, and really just kind of making it a part of our lifestyle so that I don't feel limited by it, but I feel empowered by my choices. And so just things like that have really been huge. And again, Jesse, it's, you know, for so long I was so obsessed with the systems and things that I forgot the person. And so it's like now that I know myself so much better, it's a lot easier for me to say like, this will work for me, or this just is not going to work for the way that my brain works. And so that's been really helpful for me.
Well, stepping back out of diet and self-care, I mentioned earlier the fact that you and Drew, at least this point in your life, have really formed boundaries and prioritized how you're spending your time. Let's end on this. Let's get into some of the things you do to organize your life in that way. So you're prioritizing time with the family and not getting sucked into the email inbox or social media and different things as an entrepreneur who's doing so much work online.
Yeah. So I made a rule that like if they ever ask me to go on a walk and I'm not recording, I close my computer and go. Like if there are things that are inviting me into like life with them that I can say yes to, I always will. Um, to me, I talk about in the book like how a lot of times we focus on balance, like finding the right balance of like work and family. And like we're constantly in this like pursuit of balance. But like if you even think about having a scale and dropping grains of sand, you drop one grain too many, you're out of balance again. When you study the nature of the word balance, balance is this moment in time. It's not something meant to be maintained. And so I've tried to figure out ways to blend my life, meaning, you know, if I have to travel to speak on a stage, can my family come too? And like while we're there, can we go to the aquarium or can we go see Central Park and ride the merry-go-round? Like literally the day my book came out, I was on the Today Show and hours later I was on a merry-go-round in Central Park with my family. And it's like, this is it. Like, this is what I want for my life. Like, I want people, like success for me is not being at the top of a mountain. It's being up there enjoying the view with the people who were with me. And so it's like, how do I bring people in? And what's been so beautiful is now that my 3.5-year-old is kind of understanding more, it's like, she's proud of my work. Like she gets it. It's not this separate thing or this hush hush thing or this thing she needs to be quiet so that I can do. It's a part of like what affords us this life. And so, you know, I don't work on the weekends. I do special mommy kid dates on Saturdays. So tomorrow we're going to go sit by Lake Superior and there's a story time at the local bookstore. And we grab these little lattes and Coco gets fancy milk, which is just steamed milk with some cinnamon on top. And, you know, we've been doing this for years. And so it's like, how do we just bring more joy and pleasure in? And then how do I learn how to shut down and shut off? And what does that look like? And I think just as working hard or like achieving things is something that a lot of people train for, I think a lot of us actually need to train in how to rest. There's this notion in the book where it's like so many of us are running a 5K every day. And what we need to do is figure out how to get back to the couch. You know, there's so many couch to 5K training programs, but maybe we need to rest for 5 minutes today. And maybe tomorrow it could be 6. And what does that look like? And how do we invite that into our lives? Because for me, rest takes just as much work as working really hard. And so when I commit to rest in my life, I have to keep thought shepherding and keep reminding myself, no, be here now. This is the priority. This is the good time for this. And so maybe your listeners who are high achievers, who are really knowledgeable, who are really invested in their health, maybe something they need to ponder today is like, do I need to train myself to be better at resting? And I gander that the answer might be yes.
Jenna, I just love how you've really thought deeply about life in this way and prioritized your energy and have the balance and have just created this lifestyle that is just so admirable. So thank you so much for sharing it on the show and through your book. And we're going to link up the book in the show notes. We're going to link up your social media, your website. Thank you for coming on the show. This has been a lot of fun.
When can we all hang out and get the kids together? That's all we want.
Well, you're not too far. We're just
true.
across the border there, so we'll make it happen.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for the work you do as a listener for years. We really respect the way that you show up and what you share. So thank you.
Now that you're finished with my conversation with Jenna, be sure and stick around and watch my chat with Nedra here and learn how to set healthy boundaries.
The beginning of setting boundaries is figuring out what the solution is, what you want or need. If you're not familiar with setting boundaries and you're frustrated because